I'm David Heyerle, developer and director of Thinking Schools International. I've had the opportunity over the last 10 years to work in countries as diverse as Malaysia, Ethiopia, Norway, the UK, South Africa, and the US. In this video introduction, we're going to be able to share some of those results, but most importantly, answer some of the key questions that people ask about our work, such as, why even have something called a thinking school? What are the principles behind thinking schools? How do we implement and work with partners in different countries over time? And what are the results from our work? You'll also be able to look at research, the professional books, and the training resources that we have. Basically, what we know, Eric Schmidt of Google has basically laid this out pretty clearly, that in about maybe 20 years, every person around the globe will have a handheld device, a smartphone, because of chip technology.
There is an unprecedented wealth of information streaming through the digital devices of 21st century students. This creates a critical need for teaching our students how to filter it, analyze it, and apply it.
The question becomes, as we're questioning right now, how do we offer students models for processing that information just on even a fundamental level of, you have this array of information and different directions you can go on the web to access information. How do they filter that through? How do they make sense of it? How do they have a critical stance on it so that they can really analyze whether this website that's delivering this information has any legitimacy at all?
The Confederation of British Industry are quite clear in that they need students who are able to think for themselves, are able to work with others, are able to analyse, problem solve and put forward suggestions, and actually the thinking skill methodology promotes those softer skills which actually, when you get into a business place, are important.
They become life skills, not just school skills. So skills that they're going to be able to take as they take through with them.
It's about the student engagement at that deep level of being fluent with tools for developing their own thinking. Now that we've been introduced to why thinking schools, let's look more closely at what a thinking school is. And we'll look at the model of thinking schools, which is focused on student-centered learning and thinking in a very explicit way, as well as an overview of the principles that underlie thinking schools.
In developing their educational model, the founders of Thinking Schools International address the underlying question: how do we grow schools so that they explicitly support student-centered thinking for learning?
It's really about being able to facilitate student thinking and being very conscious about it, and that it's student-centered.
It was actually about what impact will this have on the learner, what kind of student, how resilient, can they be adaptable, can they cope with failing, and can they fail brilliantly? And then can they actually think for themselves and out of the box? Can they deconstruct their own learning and actually overcome problems themselves rather than asking for help straight away?
If we step back to a pre-K classroom or elementary school, if we're not facilitating and developing open-minded thinking as well as analytic thinking to be able to follow through, if we're not developing generative thinking as well as really being able to stay with the project over time, then they're never going to be in that place of being able to think up a great idea and possibly transform the world by it. Recently, our global trainers got together and we really considered what are some of the fundamental principles of thinking schools? What really defines, in a sense, or gives shape to what we're about in a big picture way? But it rests on three principles that we believe are important that I think resonate with most folks in the educational community. One is that thinking really is innate. I mean, we're born with these capacities to think. There's plasticity in the human brain. And the degree to which we really facilitate that kind of thinking for all students is really important. And it's about growing that ability to think, not thinking of it as a static measure. A second thing that's really key, the understanding is that we have to offer students a way of not only improving but transferring those thinking processes and dispositions and inquiry skills across disciplines into their own life and interdisciplinary learning. So transfer is really key. And the third principle is an understanding that we can't just give teachers, can't give students or a whole school a bunch of skill sets. There are plenty of those out there. And what we really need are practical models that teachers can very easily teach to students and students can learn very easily. And they need to be fundamental, they need to be adaptive, and they need to really be able to be used by all students in the classroom.
At Thinking Schools, teachers are intentional about developing students' higher-order thinking abilities, reflective metacognitive dispositions, and processes for inquiry.
What we want to do is focus on the thinking development, and this means also dispositions. So one's dispositions around thinking, so habits of mind, inquiry skills, cognitive or thinking skills, those mesh together all the way through. And that can be developed and started at any point. You know, in the Common Core, it's about higher order thinking. PISA internationally, it's about problem solving and higher order thinking. Colleges and universities are saying we have students coming in, they really can't think through problems. We have to sort of almost start over. Now that we've looked at what a thinking school is, let's look more closely at how we implement thinking schools in different countries. There are three major pathways that we take, each focused on an area of development of student thinking, one being cognition, the other being habits of mind or dispositions, and the third, problem solving. These are the fundamental student-centered pathways in a thinking school.
Educators at a thinking school are consciously facilitating students' thinking as well as teaching content knowledge.
So it isn't a matter of what is the teacher going to teach? Am I going to teach more content or am I going to teach more process? It's about the student engagement at that deep level of being fluent with tools for developing their own thinking.
It was so exciting to hear, so well done, you have brilliant adjectives as well.
So when we're able to really have different kinds of approaches that focus on the thinking, and it's efficiently done, you don't have a separate program for thinking, you have it embedded as fundamental really to the classroom experience, and students are fluent with those tools, you can look at content and process simultaneously.
Thinking Schools International has developed three pathways or approaches for schools embarking on the journey of becoming thinking schools. Each pathway has a model to facilitate its implementation.
We've developed models that are student-centered, that are practical, that are adaptable, that students can learn quite easily. The three models that we offer are really the thinking points for developing cognitive skills and thinking skills and critical thinking. The dispositions, that really the open minds model, and then the inquiry model. Now what's key is that over time, the students start to mesh those together. And so they really have a foundation for learning content, but also maturing as thinkers. We've just looked at the three models that are the foundation for thinking schools, but what are the results? Exeter University did a study of thinking schools over many years and found that it wasn't just content learning and testing that improved, but also behavioral issues, attendance, and the students' capacities to think through problems more thoroughly. In this series of video clips, we're going to look at more closely how not just content learning is improved, but the thinking abilities of all students.
In 2012, Exeter University conducted research through interviews and surveys, exploring thinking schools and the implementation of their thinking models. Schools consistently reported increased levels of independent learning, improved academic attainment, fewer behavioral problems, and improved classroom management.
Very quickly realised last year in my first year here was that the thinking skills enabled me to do that better and smarter and more efficient than I had been able to previously. It not only enabled me to get to that place, it enabled the students in the room to learn to that level and higher quicker and more effectively than I had previously managed.
Now that we've had an opportunity to look at why thinking schools, what they are, how we implement thinking schools, and the results, this video tour is coming to a close. Move ahead to the points that show the research behind our work, the training resources that are available, the professional books that detail the range of work that we've done, and also links to our website. Hope you've enjoyed this tour, and please come visit us on our website.